of Vanishing Gradients. Super excited here today to be here with Greg Ceccarelli. What is up, Greg?
Not a lot, just another day in paradise.
I couldn't agree more. And in fact, as you know, it's Thursday morning here. It's the future, and I'm looking outside, and it is a beautiful, beautiful day. So we're here to talk about building the future, right? How AI is transforming who can create software. I'd like to welcome everyone here in the chat. Please let us know who you are, where you're calling in from, and what your interest in such things is. Do you work in data science or ML or AI, or you're a product manager who wants to learn more about how to use these types of tools? And if you like this type of thing, please give it a like and subscribe and share with friends. If you don't like it, just stop watching. It's as easy as that. Don't leave rude comments. That's fine. It's the internet. Greg, so excited to have you here. There's a lot of conversation around vibes these days and vibe coding. And one thing I want to do with you today is kind of break apart. It's not vibes or no vibes, right? There's an entire spectrum, if not multi-dimensional space that we're working in. So to get started, I don't want to dive straight into that. What I do want to get from you is just a bit about your background and your journey and how you ended up doing what you're doing at Spec Story. Because former CPO at Plurasight, director of data science at Github, you've had a wide variety of work and career that you've done. So maybe you can just give us a bit of background on how you got to where you are today.
Yeah, thanks, Hugo. I've had a meandering career, to be honest. When I graduated from university, I started as a management consultant. And it's funny because sometimes I joke like, hey, I'm still a recovering management consultant in some ways. But the one thing that opened me up to is just like the variety of business and challenges and also working with data, quite frankly. It's where I actually met a couple people that I think, we're mutually acquainted with. And I realized that in consulting, you basically either it's an up or out situation, right? And it's like you're going to be a career consultant or you're going to move to industry. And so I was lucky enough about a decade ago to move out west. I do live in Washington, D.C. today, but I lived in San Francisco for about 7 years. And that's how I got started in tech. Yeah, so as you mentioned, I've had a little bit of an interesting journey, you could say, I guess. And for a long time in my life, I was very focused on like the managerial track, right? That's just kind of what at a certain point you realize is, or at least historically, it's been kind of like, you know, what you get rewarded for. But it's not the only thing you get rewarded for. And the thing I really enjoyed about the sort of tech scene, because it has its positives and negatives, is at a lot of companies that are software businesses, you can have a lot of impact in individual contributor roles. And just to kind of bring this around, I think the sort of threshold we're on, where AI is starting to permeate sort of everything that knowledge workers do, kind of makes you reevaluate, like, where can you have the most impact? Is it managing very large teams, or is it building software that can have a very large impact on many perhaps smaller teams? So
Yeah, appreciate all of that context. And what led us to this conversation today is, as you know, I do, and among other things, do a lot of work building with LLMs and AI. And the way you framed it to me is that you don't build AI powered products, but you don't build AI powered software per se, but what you're interested in is building software using AI. So maybe you could just elucidate that distinction a bit more for us.
yeah, and it's not black and white, because to be quite fair, the product that we are building, our current product iteration at Spec Story, which right now is a cursor extension, actually is also LLM powered. But I am most interested in making it more accessible for those who might not be traditional developers or software engineers, or on the fringes of that, right, technically minded, able to build more reliably with AI. So I think the distinction is, everyone, since Copilot was released, GitHub Copilot, what it's probably going on 4 years at least now, knows that there's like AI capability in the editor. And of course, recently you opened the conversation talking about vibes. with some of the agentic SDE capabilities in tools like Cursor or Windsurf, or of course now GitHub Copilot is introducing their agentic coder. It's becoming more and more accessible to basically program with English language. And so how do you democratize that, right? I think one of the things that's interesting to me, because actually at Pluralsight, one of the first sort of missions, and if people aren't familiar with Pluralsight, think Udemy, Coursera, played in the same space, right? It's online sort of ed tech professional training, was to democratize access to technology skills. And I think that LLMs and AI are doing a fantastic job of that. And so, how do you kind of reduce the gradient of the ascent that's required in order to, start getting feedback on how you can bring your sort of ideas to life? That's where we're at right now. I mean, you can, and if you're on a certain part of Twitter, you can see that every day, right? People are vibing, building things, some of which are coming under scrutiny. But at the same time, I think it's widening the aperture of who is going to be able to experience telling a computer what to do and getting an outcome.
Totally. And viewers and listeners may know this about me, but my background's in scientific research in biology, math, and physics. And a large part of my career has been trying to help people with scientific and data-centric backgrounds build more robust software, right? So we've been coming at this from a variety of different angles. And we have mentioned the vibe. So I suppose it is worth drilling down into how we can use AI assistants or co-pilots, whatever we want to call them, to help us build software. Not necessarily write code, but build software, right? So I think this all started with a tweet that Andrej Karpathy wrote. So I'm just going to read out part of that. He wrote, for those who don't know this, there's a new kind of coding I call vibe coding, where you fully give in to the vibes. I love that. Embrace exponentials and forget that the code even exists. And I think we've ended up in a space where there's a lot of friction and controversy around it, and a lot of hate, to be honest. So I think there are grifters on one side, and a lot of people dismissing it on the other side. I think in the middle, there's a lot of fertile ground to explore, to be honest. So I'm wondering, from your perspective, how do you even think about starting adopting tools before we get to vibes? What's the continuum look like from starting to work with LLMs to doing like the extreme version of vibe coding and not even being aware of what's in the code per se?
Yeah. Well, I mean, of course, it all comes down to what your sort of professional expertise or prior knowledge is. But I mean, there's a big sort of spectrum of products out there on the market today, some of which are, I think now, like some of the fastest growing SaaS products probably since Wiz, which just got acquired by Google, like the other day. I think it held the record. And so, for me, whenever I was really starting to explore some of these tools more specifically, I'd say kind of like, I would argue that today they kind of compete against the web builders, like the Webflows and Squarespaces. There's like Bolt.new, there's Lovable.dev, there's basically more constrained environments that allow you to prompt, get code, see that version code in sort of like a sandbox that you can instantly deploy and iterate on it. The one downside to some of them are they restrict you in terms of like the frameworks and technology stacks that you can use. They're mostly like TypeScript or JavaScript, right? And like you're going to build like a React app, and it's a little bit better than like sort of the sandbox experience that Claude, for example, offers via its artifacts functionality. But I think those are probably some of the easiest entry points if you're interested in like, hey, how can I use natural language and sort of get working software? Because they're all self-contained. And I think a lot of people are starting with them. I'd say in the middle, probably like a product like Replit, right? You can code in pretty much any sort of language you want. You can use natural language. You can write the code. It's completely hosted. It's deployable. And then sort of, the most technical are the IDEs, right? The ones that we sort of talked about at the beginning. But just to say them again, it's like, you have the VS Code forks like Cursor and Windsurf. You have some of the open source products like Aider, Klein, and depending on your comfort level, like if you haven't opened an IDE in 5 years, maybe you'd want to start, more on the left side of that spectrum. But there's a great continuum. And then I think for a lot of people, I should mention like v0.dev from Vercel, right? Because more and more it's becoming something that can almost completely host anything built with like Next.js, right? Because that's their bread and butter. But for me, it was actually starting a little bit with a sprinkling of v0.dev. I dipped my toe a little bit into Lovable, but I really figured out that I wanted a lot more control, and that's what kind of got me on the cursor train, probably back in August of last year.
August 2024, which led up to your quote unquote September moment. So maybe you can tell us a bit about your September moment and what happened in that magical month.
Yeah. Well, one of the things that I do beyond software compose, vibe code, try to find product market fit for a startup, read a lot, is I also write. And I have a Substack called Meditations on Tech. And what Hugo's referring to, which maybe goes in the show notes, or you can send a link.
Yeah, and I'm going to link to it in YouTube right now as well, but yes.
Yeah, is something that I wrote, actually, I think it was in January, which was a little bit of a, personal expose on really my, the feeling that I want to be able to express and convey to as many people as possible, about one, sort of like reinvention, and two, about just what you can do if you put your mind to something. Like, I think a great aphorism is, not very many things are difficult, just unfamiliar. And as you build like more familiarity with things and you do things sort of every day, right, and you really apply a lot of focus to the thing that you're interested in, you can get really good at it.
Yeah.
And the thing about building with AI is that it is a completely different skill set than writing traditional software, right? Because if you think about the way that, well, first of all, it's stochastic, right? It's going to be influenced by the sort of quality of the input, aka your prompts and the context that you can feed models. But there's a lot of like rough edges that you have to learn about. But once you start to dig in and you experience sort of more outcomes because you're doing it consistently with purpose, I think it can become very intoxicating. One of the reasons why is because you actually get to make less decisions, right? There's actually another great Substack. I'll just plug it here, by one of the co-founders of Mode. I think it's just like Ben.Substack, right? And he
Ben Stansel.
Yeah, Ben Stansel.
Oh,
he wrote about this.
Brilliant. Yeah.
He wrote about this intoxicating feeling, where I'm kind of lifting some words from one of his more recent articles. It might have been like 2 weeks ago, talking about this fact that you actually sort of seed decision making. And I think when we talk about vibes, right, if you're going to the extreme of vibe coding, often what happens is you kind of you allow what's being built to get ahead of your understanding of what's actually happening, and you're not understanding maybe not just the architecture of what's getting built, but like actually what's happening under the hood, what the code is doing. And for some people that might be fine, depending on the purpose of what you want to use that resultant code for. But it is empowering, because you can focus on higher order abstractions, and depending on, again, what you're doing it for, it can be extremely fruitful. I'm going to stop for a second, but I'll get more into some of the use cases if you want, to talk about why I think it's so fruitful.
I'd love that in a second. It does kind of bring to mind, I'll link to this as well. Jono Whitaker has, from Answer AI and from being a legend, has a great post about something that he vibe coded. And the details don't matter for the purpose of this, but he sent it to some people, then they asked questions about it, and he was like, I don't really understand what's happening. And he was like, I'm going to go and build it myself, and I may be missing a few details here. But when he built it himself, he realized it was reducible to 3 modules that were connected in a particular way. And he then understood the inner workings of it, right? And it just reminded me, when I started working in biology, previously I was working in maths, as we say here, mathematics. And And it kind of reminds me of the difference between closed form solutions to equations and simulating things. And when I started working in biology, stuff was so complex, you can't get closed form mathematical solutions to a lot of things. So I used MATLAB and then jumped into Python in the then IPython notebook, pre-Jupyter times, and started simulating stuff and having this little lab on my laptop. And I didn't necessarily understand the math behind, the systems I was building, but the power to build something complex there, with slightly less understanding, but something far more complex, I think this is reminiscent of that for me.
Yeah, it is. And of course, you can use software composition, vibe coding, AI assisted programming, even some people have named it like chat oriented programming. It's all
Chop, yeah.
thing, chop. Beyond it being intoxicating because you can sort of make less decisions and beyond simulating things, I think, being able to explore both problem spaces and solution spaces really quickly with a really fast REPL cycle, right? It's kind of like what makes people gravitate to interpreted languages versus compiled languages, because you could just especially if you're working in the data field, you can just see, you can, write a function, run it, see what the variable states are, modify it, interact in the terminal. And in a lot of ways, that compressed cycle time of getting fast feedback is one of the biggest benefits, right? To what building with AI, specifically sort of ceding more control over to the LLM as you're prompting, affords. And that is extremely, extremely beneficial because, if we abstract up a little bit, you think about the way that software has been built for the last 20 years and actually probably beyond that. It's required a lot of specialized skill. And especially if we're talking about software that's getting built for a business use case, there's sort of ROI cost equation, right? And so if you can reduce that, even if, AI assisted programming hasn't really taken off for, production use cases to the extent I believe it will, that holds a ton of promise and has a huge amount of impact that I think we're just starting to scratch the surface of.
Yeah, totally. We have a great question around building trust with these systems and how dangerous it is for people starting, which I want to get to. But before that, I do want to. So Charles Fry, and I'll link to this tweet, who's a colleague of mine. I presume you know Charles, but yeah, cool guy, huh?
Yeah, great hair.
Amazing hair and spectacles as well. He wrote the complaints about vibe coding, in my opinion, not even wrong. It's a terrible way to build software as we currently do it, where software machines have many nines of reliability and used by millions, but a great way to build ephemeral end-user program software. So what this speaks to is just the increased surface area of what we're able to do now at this higher level of abstraction. So I'd love your thoughts on that before we jump into a bunch of concrete things that you've worked on.
Yeah. Well, I wrote a post about this sort of ephemeral or disposable software. I think it's titled something on my Substack along the lines of more software should die young. And I used an analogy around disposable cameras, right? And what sort of that afforded and the surface area that disposable cameras in their heyday allowed for, right? Before people obviously had, fantastic high resolution megapixel cameras sitting in their phone, you would take it to a party, you would not care about what happened to it. You would capture moments that you otherwise wouldn't have brought your Nikon to or whatnot. And you were able to, have a lot of fun. And so there's a lot of different types of, I think, scenarios where, building something today in 2 hours to solve a particular problem in a way that you couldn't have before, even if you're the only user, makes a whole ton of sense. And it could be in a work setting or it could be in a personal setting. And for example, maybe to sort of lead myself, one of the things I was doing earlier last week was for one of the pieces of functionality that we just released for Spec Story, it sort of auto-derives your cursor rules. And this is one of those things that is actually LLM powered, whereby we send some of your sort of chat history. This is only if you want this, of course. You send your chat history. We send sort of the state of your project folder, our system prompts available on our docs, and using using a set of file headers, we help people like auto derive their cursor rules for them that you would have had to otherwise sort of manually write. And it's experimental, and we're not sure actually how to evaluate it very well, because it's kind of like, what do you test there? But that's a separate subject. The point of that exposition was, I wanted to explore some pretty complicated trace data out of the service that we're using to log all of these requests, Heliocone, and I needed to download like this fairly large set of requests, and it's in this very sort of complicated JSON. And if and I didn't really know the relationship between some of the tables or whatnot. And if you've ever worked with JSON in SQL to start to explore it, like most editors don't allow you to like natively browse that. So I was like,
Yeah.
I'm gonna roll my own editor just for this use case to get a bearing on what I ultimately want to extract, which are these like text chunks of these requests. And so I did that, and I would have never done that. Like, well, I couldn't have ever done that, first of all, and I would never have done that in any, I don't know, prior life. And not only was it rewarding, it helped me like solve the problem in a way that I could have spent a lot of time finding the perfect SQL IDE to ingest this data into and explore it. But I was like, the cost of going down this route is a couple hours of time. Why not?
Totally. And I'm interested in that case. Did you need to just introspect into the code, check out the code a bit to make sure it was doing the thing you thought it was doing, like not serving you incorrect traces or something like that?
Not in that case. Well, it was a multi-step process. So first of all, it was like, okay, how do I actually download this stuff? I had to get familiar with like Helicone's API, and then some of the data that comes out of Helicone's API, because some of these request response pairs are so gigantic, are actually stored in S3 buckets. And I'm using LLMs the whole time, right? But then it was like, well, I want to build this specifically because I want to store this data on disk, and it's about like 14 gigs. So I used DuckDB. I'd never used DuckDB in my entire life, but I'm like, this seems like a good technology to try. And because a lot of the like sort of scripts to download from the API from their GraphQL endpoint, I was using Python. I was like, I'm going to roll this thing in a framework that I've never used, because a lot of stuff that I build is in TypeScript, because LLMs have a lot of TypeScript and JavaScript in their training sets and are pretty good at it. I actually used fast HTML and also the sort of like newest ShadCN sort of like component library Monster UI, which I had also never used. And so a lot of the time that I spent sort of debugging and troubleshooting, building this IDE was around, one, my low exposure to some of those technologies, but two, the LLM's low exposure to those technologies. But luckily, Isaac Flath, who is the gentleman who came up with Monster UI, has made a lot of their docs very accessible to LLMs using the LLMs.txt sort of new proposal for, I guess you could call it AI empathy, right? Like, how do we make it easier for the AI?
So for those who haven't heard of this, it's kind of like when you put in whatever it is, index equals true to, and all that stuff to make sure that search engines can read your websites. There's something for LLMs.
Yeah, those folks that have docs, can basically expose all of their docs as Markdown. Yeah.
Yep.
And so, like, yeah, that was sort of the path and sort of journey I took for that particular use case. Yeah, just to put a
Awesome
bow on it.
So essentially, you're talking about, among other things, it's you building up, spinning up ephemeral tools for exploratory data analysis. And so, like, a lot of people, that's what we do in data science. We use notebooks for that. And people complain that notebooks, like cell execution, blah, 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 totally missing the point of what notebooks are for. And they're not necessarily for entirely reproducible stuff all the time, although you can do that. I'm not going to start any flame wars, particularly with our mutual friends. But the idea that, for data analysis, for data science, even for ML exploration, you can start building ephemeral tools for dashboarding or whatever it may be to explore your own stuff. I think that's incredibly exciting as well.
Yeah, you can. And actually, something I could show, because Hugo and I, we've been debating, like, do I do a whole live demo or like maybe build off something that, it's pre-existing? Because there's some of it's a lot of trial and error, and I'm happy to show sort of like the vibe coding plus vibe debugging process. But one of the things that I was actually doing this afternoon around 2 p.m. my time, like so 6 hours ago, is I was thinking like, what could be cool to show for this audience? Because a lot of the stuff that I'm building, well, it's obviously related, isn't necessarily targeting the sort of probably core audience that you have of like data scientists, machine learning
Yeah.
researchers, or sort of like applied ML folks. And I did spend a long time at GitHub, where actually I was like the director of data science and machine learning prior to joining PluralSight. And I know that people have so many gripes about the way that certain types of data assets are handled in repos. Of course, like the whole Jupyter Notebook thing. I actually went and built a little Chrome extension that marks up the DOM of GitHub and allows you to write SQL against CSVs in any repo, which
Awesome.
I'm happy to show off.
That'd be cool. And so we'll do the demo. We'll do some things at the end, but I'd love to see that.
Yeah.
I am interested in. Let's get to this question from Mr. Me 77. His questions: how dangerous is vibe coding for people starting in data science, and perhaps in terms of losing problem-solving skills, among other things?
Yeah, well, I mean, dangerous is kind of a pretty broad, like that's probably also a pretty broad spectrum. I
Mm.
think, look, like, I talked about it being intoxicating. I think depending on, where, depending on your identity, honestly, and what you care about, right? Like some people, for example, really care about understanding certain things very deeply, or they get a lot of satisfaction and have a lot of incentives tied to becoming extraordinarily technical and understanding the inner workings of a particular language or a particular problem space. If you are more of a generalist, however, and you want to get broad exposure to a lot of, I don't know, different surface areas, application stacks, technologies, languages, I certainly don't think it's dangerous for that. In fact, I think it makes that actually accessible. But like anything, if you rely on something, a tool, then naturally you probably could lose some amount of your sort of past expertise. But I think it's all about how you use it, right? Like anything. And so if the question about danger was about like, are you going to, I don't, I don't know what that means, so maybe we have to clarify. But I think depending on the setting in which you're using products like this and what the stakes are, or perhaps what the user impact is, that's where perhaps some of the notions that Charles was describing around it might not be appropriate for production come in. But I think the reason that is the world today is extraordinarily code centric. Everything is code centric. All the tools we use are code centric. If you want to know how a piece of software runs, the primary source of truth is the code. And we didn't really talk about this at the onset, but one of the bets that's just inherent to what we're doing at Spec Story is that beyond the code as the only source of truth, the spec, the sort of specification, that might be sort of iterated over via prompts or maybe top-down generated, becomes another extremely important asset, because as more and more folks start to use agentic coding sort of software for delivery, you want to have that traceability from the actual intent that you expressed, however you did it, to the actual code that got generated. And if you can do that more reliably, then I think in more work settings, for example, it will grow in adoption. Because today, if you use, for example, Cursor, or you use Windsurf or Copilot, all your prompts, all your chat history is not actually tied to the code. And that makes traditional challenges, if you think about software development as having sort of two loops, right? An inner dev loop where people go from, code to build to sort of test to compile to push, right? That's the inner dev loop, what folks are doing all day, to the outer loop of activities where, you might go through a code review process. Your code gets tested and integrated through a CI/CD pipeline. It's obviously built and then sort of deployed and released. That is not just a technical process. This is like a socio-technical process, right? And if you can generate code extraordinarily quickly. You don't know what it does. You can't explain it. If someone's interrogating it via a code review process and don't know what your intent was even to produce it, like the likelihood of that getting integrated into a company's code base is low, right? And so I think, as this space matures, and obviously, a lot of the thesis behind the business, even though it might not be evident from our current product iteration, is around what is the new store for intent? What should that be? How do you think about English language as a first-class citizen? How do you think about conflict resolution at the intent level? How do you, store or version that? And how do you link it to the code artifacts that get generated from it?
Totally. So, well, the other thing, of course, is LLMs can be great at helping us figure out what intent from natural language is as well, compared to at least previous versions of natural language understanding and these types of things. Something you've spoken to is not only the different types of software that can be built as a function of cost as well, but the types of people that can build software. So do you see, you know, different personas being able to work more closely on building software together now and in the future?
So totally, that's yes. I mean, I think it's I haven't observed it much in the wild, but one of the things that we have started to do as part of research for where we're taking the future of Spec Story is talk to users of our current like sort of single player focused tool and understand sort of like what they're doing with it. And we actually just had a research conversation yesterday with a large public company that we learned had encouraged many of their software engineers to download and use Spec Story. And we were lucky enough to basically meet someone at that company who mandate in the engineering organization is to sort of drive AI tool use adoption. And they have a very large effort across their engineering base to do so. And so you asked about other people. I'm going to get there in a second, but I think what's really interesting for us, one of the learnings was like there's even a spectrum within engineering of who's adopting or not adopting, more agentic, composer-like workflows. And one of the things that they're using some of the sort of prompt histories for that they sort of version, because all of them get dumped if you're using the extension into like the root of your sort of project structure, and you can push them to Git or whatnot, is actually helping to debug sort of prompts, right? So for people that haven't sort of operated that way, that are learning this sort of new way of communicating with their computer, like, why didn't this series of prompts actually have the effect that I thought it would? They're actually using that as an internal education device in order to basically generate more adoption of these products internally because of their sort of belief systems and some of the like company incentives around it. But on the flip side, at that same company and some others, we know that product managers and designers and people who are not sort of naturally in the code are starting to adopt either some of the AI IDEs or some of the other sort of peripheral products like we talked about at the very beginning, like the lovable.devs or the bolt.news or even the v0.devs in helping aid whatever they're trying to do, whether it's build a fast prototype or series of prototypes to explore a solution space or help design something. So yeah, I think that it's just a matter of time until it grows in adoption, and sort of the folks on the fringes figure out that with precisely specified intent, just how much you can actually do.
And I know that something you think quite a bit about is how different personas and different people in different teams or the same team can interact with LLMs and agents more generally. How do you see the future of agentic structures and vibe coding existing within teams?
Interesting. How do I see them existing within teams? Meaning, give me an example.
Well, for example, right now, agentic coding assistants like Cursor a single player, right? You and I
Oh,
can't.
yeah,
We could pair program with it,
yeah.
but we can't. You can't be there and me here, and us have a three-way conversation with an agent that helps us with stuff, right?
Well, yeah, it's okay. Great question. Now I'm tracking. Um, Internally, I have two co-founders at Spec Story,
Mm-hmm.
and some folks in engineering, and we actually do what you've just said almost every day. So, and a lot of this is because some of the tooling doesn't exist to make sort of like asynchronous review better and easier, like I was sort of alluding to.
Mm.
But we call it tri-composing. So what that means is it's me, another person, and the agent, right? That's the it's not a pair, it's tri. And we've explored a couple different ways of doing this. So one, if we were on Zoom, we could do this easily. I don't know if this particular recording service allows for it, but you can actually have you can actually take control of someone's screen,
Yep.
and so we've done it that way. If we want to, for example, send prompts, we'll use like Whisper, right, to record our
Mm-hmm.
voice. That obviously works over a Zoom type interface, and sort of be able to both reason about the code that's getting generated and sort of the next set of steps that we want to take and make it be sort of collaborative. But I think one of the things that I actually want to explore is, and there aren't good products for this, at least as far as I've been able to find, is what you're saying. Like, how could you actually kind of do it like together? You can kind of do this, by the way, on Replit. So you
Mm.
can create a Replit project, and you can actually send like multiplayer prompts, but at any given time, like whatever the LLM is accessing it's going to sort of work sequentially. Um, but you can sort of share the ability to prompt a single project together today on like a Replit. We just don't
Super
use
cool.
Replit that much internally. And so I would love to be able to, for example, spin up a multiplayer cursor composer session that somehow could modify the same code base at the same time. You can do it, I think, although I haven't explored this in great depth with like Git. I think they're file trees. It's a little
Mm.
known feature of Git that allows you to basically create multiple branches with like basically instead of just branching onto a new branch, it actually copies a directory for you,
Right.
and then you sort of merge them in the same way. I think they're called Git file trees, and I wanted to explore that. We've also tried to do it simultaneously by setting up a server that would basically sync a network drive, and it didn't work super well. But we've explored some of these like multiplayer use cases. Yeah,
Super
it's
cool. And you call it tri composing? Is that
try composing.
tri composing? So this actually we've this has been implicit in our conversation. We've alluded to it, but this idea of modern software work being more about composing and that reframing. I'm actually going to read to you a tweet you wrote, and I kind of want to discuss the start of it first, but all of it I'm really aligned with. You wrote low key hate vibe quoting. Vibe coding, it is okay. I'm going to start again. Low key hate vibe coding. It is such a polarizing and now in many cases pejorative term. It dismisses the reality that a lot of modern software work is more about composing, integrating APIs, configuring tools, and orchestrating systems. Software composition is a better descriptor of what's been made possible with SDE agents. It's real work, even if it doesn't fit the old school definition of programming where you write line by agonizing line. So I actually want to break this apart and not even get to composition at the start. Your second sentence is vibe coding is such a polarizing and in now many cases pejorative term. Can you just tell me why you think this is and what's happening right now?
Yeah, I mean, it's like the X Twitterification of things. At least because that's where I think a lot of the conversation is happening at the,
Mm.
like with the sort of the frequency and speed of, if you're on a certain part of Twitter, right, that part of Twitter, you're going to see people that are just engagement baiting, showing like, hey, I built this SaaS software product in 2 minutes and blah, 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 like, or like, check out me one-shotting this game I made, right? and it's like very sensationalized. And I think that's the thing that I don't love, because before Andre coined that phrase, vibe coding, um, I actually have to give credit. A great content streamer, Riley Brown, he started
Mm.
a community called Senior Software Composer, where I picked up on this phrase of software composing, and I'll drop in our chat. I wrote this article, which was sort of cross-linked on my Meditations on Tech Substack, but also it's on Tola Capital's sort of ideas page around the rise of the software composer, where I really tried to break down, like the definition of it. And the reason I like composition is, you can think about a lot of the work, again, that we do today is building on top of libraries and things that have been already written for us. Like that's the benefit of open source. But you're gluing a lot of things together ultimately, right? Like you're figuring out how to make an API call here or there, and what the API library is you're using. And I think it's like for a lot of software use cases, that is ultimately what you need to do, is you need to figure out how to sort of compose the right solution as if you were, a musical like composer, right? You're
Mm.
not inventing new notes. You're inventing sort of a new melody, stringing together a bunch of pre-existing notes, or in this case, pre-existing software, right? And that's why I like the sort of phrase and the term a lot better, because people have just sort of taken vibe coding too far to the nth degree, where they aren't actually thinking about what is getting generated or what is getting quote unquote written, and that might be appropriate for some cases, but even disposable apps shared in like my September moment, right? Even if I didn't know precisely what everything was doing, I understood how the program or the sort of product fit together, and I could reason enough about it, because I was able to test it, change it, test it, see it like that, right? And when I say test, I mean test the functionality of it, in a lot
Mm.
of cases, because if it's not going to be something robust, you're probably not going to care about, writing a lot of test cases for it. But, if it is, maybe you should. And there's a lot of heuristics around, how you can take that sort of approach and get pretty far, even if you don't precisely know, the particular language you're working in, or every single thing that is happening in the code base. Which, by the way, people that work in professional software and are professional developers or engineers also don't know everything that's happening in an entire code base anyway. So,
Mm.
yeah,
Totally. And on top of that, a lot of the time when we're building MVPs, right, like we will use stuff we don't know and spend days classically Googling stuff, right,
yeah,
about packages we don't know much about. And now we get to do that using, the sum of human knowledge as encoded in large language models, right, which is pretty impressive. And that's why I think one of the critiques of you can't build production, robust, reliable, secure software using it is not even wrong, because that isn't what we're claiming.
yeah. Well, I think that it's all about the approach. So one of the things that I'll sort of talk about a little bit is there's different modes that we even internally go into, right? And I like to define them as being either explore mode or exploit mode, meaning if I want to get a feel for how something's going to look or feel, building a prototype is much, much better than writing a bunch of user stories or a very large PRD document, right? Because people naturally perk up and actually participate and have a reaction to something that they can sort of kinesthetically feel, touch, use,
Experience.
right? Experience. Um, and when you're sort of in explore mode, when you're software composing or vibe coding, right, in a setting that is not, totally for shits and giggles, right, then you have this sort of agency and leeway to take sort of more risks, right? But then as soon as we actually figure out, like, hey, maybe this prototype for this particular part of a solution space we're exploring is something that we want to kind of make real, make production ready, and integrate into our app, it's not like we go back and like completely rewrite everything from scratch. We just enter a different mode, which is kind of like the exploit mode, where like a try composing session, which is very similar in a lot of ways to pair programming or like mob programming, right? Where you're all kind of looking at the same screen and someone's driving. We make a very discrete work plan from maybe what we've software composed and go through and, hopefully we're like committing that, or if we didn't commit that at every sort of step, we go through and make sort of like a work breakdown structure. We work in small batches like you should, and we review the contents of the commit, right, together and make hot modifications there to the commit before we actually push it on to the branch that hopefully will get integrated into main, right, and shipped. And that's a very different mode and mindset, because you're turning on your you're turning up the scrutiny of like what you care about, right? And you care about different things, because if this is in your production app or production feature or whatever it is, you want to make sure that you understand it, and you want to make sure you understand it, because at some point, if there's user consequence to something going wrong, it's like the old saying, like who's going to respond to the pager at midnight and be responsible for the sort of like the fix, if there is a need for that. And so if we can build enough confidence that yes, we might have run far ahead of ourselves to get sort of an idea of what it was precisely that we wanted to actually make real, and then sort of take a couple steps back and say, okay, now that we're ready to make this real, we're going to break it down and build a shared understanding of it, not wholly in a traditional sense of we're going to go back and rewrite every single thing from scratch, but the sort of engineering constraints and the sort of technical requirements of how it should function, coding standards that we have or have developed, like just like the way we want to name variables, for example, like make sure that's consistent, right? Make sure that we're not, actually injecting a bunch of duplicative code into our code base, because LLMs are really great at like duplicating a lot of things unnecessarily.
And file structures as well.
Yeah, make sure that's cogent, right? And so it's
and you can get your LLM to help with this as well, right? If you're in the loop with it really nicely.
Yeah, and I think the biggest misnomer is that like vibe coding or software composing doesn't require technical understanding. It most certainly does. And it requires being able to understand what questions to ask, like you just mentioned, around, is like you could build a gigantic sort of single file app, right? But there's a couple of reasons why you might not want to do that. One is obviously as the file grows in size, it's much harder for the AI SD agent to hold that in its context window. It's going to chew through a lot of that way more quickly. But you also run the risk of having inadvertent regressions where the LLM might delete something. So it's like, okay, when do we actually take the step to modularize this and break it apart, and maybe break it down into components, or move these files that are obviously we're able to extract into a different location. And so yeah, it's just like lots of very obvious common software development approaches, those don't go out the window. In fact, that becomes the most important thing, the architecture of how you build what you're going to build, and that never goes away.
I agree completely, and I've just linked to. It's a shame I agree with everything you're saying, Greg. I just linked to a post by an essay by Tim O'Reilly called "The End of Programming as We Know It," in which he mentions Chip Huen, who wrote the book AI Engineering, among other things. But an observation he made to her in an email. Chip wrote, "I don't think AI introduces a new kind of thinking. It reveals what actually requires thinking. No matter how manual, if a task can be done by a handful of those most educated, that task is considered intellectual. One example is writing, the physical act of copying words on a paper. In the past, when only a small portion of the population was literate, writing was considered intellectual. People even took pride in their calligraphy. Nowadays, the word writing no longer refers to this physical act, but the higher abstraction of arranging ideas into a readable format. Similarly, once the physical act of coding can be automated, the meaning of programming will changed to refer to the act of arranging ideas into executable programs.
I mean, I can't say I disagree with that or you
Yeah.
either. I mean, that's the whole concept of, this higher form of abstraction around intent, right? Um, and also, I can't claim first credit for this notion. There's this fantastic Substack by Tyler Jewell, who doesn't write very frequently anymore. He was a VC, I think, with like Dell Technology Capital or Dell Capital Technology. I always sort of invert them. And now he's the CEO of a company, I think, called ACA. And the reason I got turned on to it, and we didn't even talk about this, but beyond being the CPO at Pluralsight, one of the things that I first did is I ran a product line called Pluralsight Flow, which is in the sort of software engineering measurement space. And say what you will about that, it's a religious war subject for many, right? Like, is it possible to measure developer productivity? But I was very interested just generally in the DevTools landscape, and of course this came after GitHub, and I started reading some of his Substack because he had this catalog of basically the developer tooling landscape. And one of his last sort of posts, which is like almost a book in length, it's about autonomous systems and the future of programming. It came out in June of 2022. He talks about sort of this next wave of essentially autonomous systems before ChatGPT 3.5 or whatever even released, as allowing for intent to be stored and then dispatched and sort of that generate artifacts. And I think that was before much ahead of its time, even though that's only like 3 years ago. But if you think about it, like every time there's a new sort of technological shift, right? You talked about like calligraphy, and now everyone types so they don't care about writing as much. There's been like friction, right? I actually profiled this in a Substack article that you commented on, that had a little bit of a spicy name. I think I called it "Handwritten Code is Virgin, LLM Output a Whore," right? And it's actually it's an allusion to this scribe back. I think his name is like Filippo di Strada, who was writing in earnest against the technological shift being brought upon when Gutenberg's printing press came out, right? And talking about, well, what's that going to do to the profession of being a scribe and writing things? Well, there was a lot of slop published, and there still is. It's not like people don't publish slop. And the same conversation is happening now, where it's like, if programming or computing, generating code is so much more accessible, there's going to be so much slop. But isn't it better to make it more accessible? Because yes, while there is the potential for more poorly written code, there's also the potential for the 99.5% of the world that doesn't have the ability to program, to get into it, to become interested in it. And I think it's like anything in history, there's no sort of putting the genie back into the bottle, right? So I think the question now becomes, how do you make this new form of programming, how do you make natural like language as a complement to being able to write code, reliable and sustainable and increasingly more accessible, right? Like that's the big question in my mind is, how do you make this work, right? Where if we had this conversation 2-3 years from now, or maybe even shorter than that, it wouldn't even be a question, because a lot of the workflows and systems had evolved to support this new way of taking an idea in your mind and translating it into machine readable code.
I think part of the mismatch as well is people thinking it always refers to you don't know anything that's happening in your system. And so someone in the chat, Phil, has a question saying, what type of industries do you foresee being early adopters for vibe coding? Would it be more startups, enterprises? And then, no, I'm sorry. Then Seth, I thought this was from Phil as well, but Seth then says, I have a colleague who created an impressive enhancement for some open source software that improves render queue management. While his code runs really well, when he submitted it, they rejected his submission. Now he needs a real software dev to fix it. So how do you think adoption will work when we hear stories like this as well?
Well, I mean, who knows? That sounds like an open source project with a maintainer that, for whatever reason, has a lot of contributing standards that maybe that person didn't follow. But um, I think to answer the first question, um, it's pretty obvious that the folks that have picked up this for sort of business use cases are like the indie hacker community, right? The indie hacker community, that might be building in public, that obviously are bootstrapping or more likely to be bootstrapping, are always looking for an advantage, right? And if they're a team of one, and now don't have to go and outsource, at least initially, to get traction or product market fit, their ideas to, especially if they're non-technical, or low technical, I guess, it's of huge benefit to them, right? Like in terms of it actually creating real value. Like I almost hesitate to say it because it's probably not like it's not like a representative. It's not a representative, but like Peter Levels, right? Like he's now, because it's more about, I think, for him, not only how creative he is, but also his audience that's giving him the success that he has. But he's an indie hacker. He is the indie hacker, right? And he's seen extreme success vibe coding his fly, .peter game, amongst other things. And it's like, how would that be possible to do, as a unit of one, if you didn't have this extra assistance that could buoy you, right? And it's not to mean that, I think every single successful business or whatnot is going to be reducible to a unit of one. But it does start to level the playing field in terms of the hardest part, of building a successful software company is probably finding that initial product market fit and quickly iterating to get there, right? But at the end of the day, I think, any successful business that actually grows to be something, that's large by conventional standards, like over a couple $1 million ARR if you're B2C, or even if you're B2B, it's going to require a team. So the real question, because there's just too many problems, right? Software business is not just a product, right? It's the team, it's the market, and it's the price by which you sell your software. There's too many problems for a single person to be able to sort of manage, at least today, probably in the foreseeable future. So then how do you take that product that might have found initial product market fit and extend it, right? And that's like the collaborative workflow of the feeling that you get when you vibe code or software compose by yourself. How do you extend that to the team, right? How do you make that real for everyone else? And how do you make sure that that's something that you can extend?
And by extend, you also mean then understand and make sure it's maintainable and reliable and these types of
Yeah,
things as well?
of course, of course. Of course, that's why I don't think software developers or engineering teams are going anywhere. You just might not need the same size team, right? And I don't think that's necessarily bad. In a lot of cases, you know, we've obviously talked about some of the hottest tools, that are leveraging LLMs in them, like the AI code IDEs, and like they're growing at tremendous rates with very small teams in terms of user adoption, ARR, whatever metric you want to look at. And it goes to reason or show that you can do a lot with a few or smaller set of very motivated individuals. And I guarantee you they're using Cursor to build Cursor. Like I know they are, right? And so that's a super meta example, but yeah, there's no reason why you can't build a successful software company using these types of approaches, especially if you realize what is important, which will ultimately be the scalability and reliability of whatever the product is that you are delivering, because reliability is a feature.
Absolutely. Well, I'm glad to hear Cursor isn't using Windsurf or Lovable. So you've talked about how AI makes coding feel more improvisational, i.e. vibe coding. I'm just wondering where the line is. Like, when do you decide you need structure, and when is the improvisation enough for your own practice?
Again, I think it's like, well, what do you want to do with that thing that you improvised, to begin with, right? It could be like, for example, I built this. I'll explain this small tool that I've built internally amongst a few that I just decided it was good enough, and it like we didn't actually need because it has 5 users, right? Like it didn't need to be re-engineered. Basically,
Mm.
if you're on a team that's using Slack, you're constantly sharing lots of stuff, and you might be sharing and posting around links, and it's hard to go find them
Mm.
right later. And so I wanted a way of understanding who was posting what, not only what they were reading, but what they might have been posting sort of on other channels. And so we built this little app. I built this app called Social Share internally. Um, and it's like a Next.js app that has, like a Postgres backend, and it's all hosted on Railway. But the core feature is that there's actually a Slackbot integration. You can tag Social Share, and you can, you know, basically it will store the link, provide a little AI generated summary, and then if you go to the backend sort of interface, you can go and look at all the past links that were ever shared by who and when. And does it need to work perfectly every time? Is it okay if there's bugs in it? Yeah, because it like has a user base of 5 and it's not growing and it's doing its job and it's been up running for the last probably 70 days, right?
Mm.
With no downtime. Um, I think the question is, well, when do you decide, maybe I really need to go and refactor this thing? It's like, well, maybe you want to open source something you've done, and you want to enable others to contribute to it. And in that case, if you just ship your single file app, it's going to be really hard for people to reason around it. So you're thinking about the community, and so then you might want to go and break it down. And it doesn't mean that you have to go and manually do it. You can use an LLM to do it. You just have to have a structured thinking approach. So I think it ultimately it depends on what's the use case and who's going to use the thing that you've built. That probably dictates the approach that makes the most sense to take.
That makes a lot of sense. I think it'd be great to jump into a demo now, if you're up for it.
Sure. What do you want to do? What do you want to build? I can show some stuff, and then maybe if I don't know if there's like audience questions. One of the
Yeah.
fun things our team did is on Reddit. Gosh, it was probably a little over a month ago now. On the Cursor forums, we did a Build Me Anything challenge where we actually
Mm.
built 14 prototypes for Redditors that were submitted like the night before, and then we spent a whole day sort of building them and sort of sharing them. That was really fun. I don't think you could have ever done such a thing prior, I don't know, 4, 5, 6 months ago, right?
I'm
Um,
going to link to that because
whatever.
you've got all the code and great videos. And I messaged you earlier today. Hans' video was super cool
Yeah.
of the converting text into what different generations would say. So yeah, why don't you show us something and then we'll get some ideas from the crowd as well.
All right, let me make sure I can like share my screen. And maybe we could start. We could just modify this because it's easier than starting from scratch. I'll show you this little thing that I was messing around with this morning. Gosh, I hope. Okay, I'm gonna just try and share my entire screen because I'm gonna have to tab through lots of stuff. So hopefully this doesn't create chaos. Can you see?
I can see it. Yeah, I can.
All right, let me look at this for a second. If I do this, can you see this? Like, can you see my cursor window here?
I can. I just want to make sure it's appearing on the YouTube as well. But yeah, if you could zoom in a bit as well.
I'll just make it bigger. Does that work?
Yeah, yeah.
Okay. All right. Well, can people see this? I'm not sure.
They can. Yeah, everyone can see it. We're good.
Okay, cool. So I have a love for GitHub, and the first thing I guess makes sense to show, we can figure out how we want to modify it a little bit, is there's a lot of stuff that's stored on GitHub that is not code, for example, data, right? And so I was thinking like, wouldn't it be cool to make a little Chrome extension so that you could like do something with this? So I just searched for, CSVs here, and I'll just pull one up, and I'll show you. I installed this extension that I built. I'll pull one that might be interesting. What's a good one? Let's just go to this actual repo because I think there's a lot of CSVs in it. Our data. Cool. So there's lots of data in this. What the thing does is basically if it finds a path that ends in CSV, I don't know, I don't just picking random things. This doesn't look very interesting because I actually want to query something. Gosh, we have to find a good example of data. Bake Off.
What's the Bake Off? Bakers.
Okay.
Great.
So something you might notice here, do you see the SQL query button? That's
yes.
like sort of poorly aligned. So that's actually what the extension is doing. It's marking
and
up.
That's the Chrome extension you built.
Yeah. So like for example, I'll just remove this here, and then I'll like reapply it, and you'll see that the DOM will change. So see, it's gone, right? So I'm gonna add it back. Load unpacked. Let me make sure I'm in the right directory. Let's go into dist. And for people that have never built a Chrome extension, well, you're gonna get a taste of what it's like to do it. The reason I didn't want to live this after I kind of went through it once is it's actually pretty complicated because of all the CSP rules that Chrome and also GitHub have, like that prevent you from doing a lot of stuff. There's actually like a background service worker and like a sandbox environment. But just to show everyone, so let me reload this now that the extension's there, and you see it comes back. If I click on this, I'm using, I think the package is like Ada SQL, which is like an NPM package that allows you to, write SQL queries against stuff sort of in memory. And so I'm going to open up the developer tools here and show you kind of like what's happening kind of like on the side. So I think here, okay, so you can see some of the stuff that's happening, right? Like sandbox URL, CSV, GitHub. Let me make this bigger. I'm making Riverside bigger, which is not what I wanted to do. You can kind of see what happens when it gets initialized. So, the DOM gets loaded, sandbox is ready, and now we're ready for queries. So one of the nice things about this, if I actually like write a query, I actually don't need to know what the table name is called because Ada uses this like little question mark syntax here, and I'll do like limit 10, and I'll run it, and there we go. We got some. This is that Baker's data set, right? We're just looking at this for whatever reason. And I just thought this was interesting because obviously
That's
like
super cool.
Big things, big CSVs, you might not want to download them. You might want to explore them first to get a sense of what's in there. So like let's write something more complicated like occupation, and then I'll just.
And just to be clear, this is something you vibe coded.
Yeah, I did it like at 2 p.m. this afternoon.
To be assured that it's giving you the results, correct results though, have you needed to look at the code to just confirm a few things? Or how do you learn to trust what you've vibe coded?
Well, in this case, I don't have a lot of experience building Chrome extensions. So like one of the strategies that I used in this case was I was iteratively testing it as I was building it, right? And like obviously I know, like how SQL works, right?
Yeah.
I can kind of verify that this is working as expected, right? But there are parts of it that I know are not working correctly. So like I don't actually even know what save query does because I wasn't testing this. Let's see. Test on Baker's data set.
Baker's Delight. Sorry, that's a chain in Australia.
The funny thing is now I have no idea how do I access that, right?
Yeah.
Like I don't actually know what happens now. But yeah, the basic functionality I was able to sort of get working here, and we can add like another query, and we can do something. I can't even remember what the columns were. So let's look at them again. Oh, Baker. Okay, there's like not actually that much stuff. Oh, that's only 10 rows. Yeah, so you get the idea. Like it works enough for what I was trying to get across, which was could I actually load this and run something that required an eval function in a sandbox, because the content scripting, whatever CSP stands for, doesn't allow you to in a Chrome extension evaluate things, and so that's why there is actually a there's what you see here, but there's also this background service that goes and fetches the data and loads it, and then there's this sort of sandbox HTML which has less restrictions in terms of what Chrome allows or doesn't allow to happen. but yeah, why don't we like look at it? And one of the things I can show too is I think in my plan, so I know this isn't the full history and maybe it's not as exciting, but I actually started off like this. Like this is actually what I first wrote to start to execute this.
Mm-hmm.
And one of the things that Spec Story does is it stores all your history over here. So I started from like a starter repo, and like this is Markdown, so I can just like preview this, right? And you know, this do this. There's actually the plan was in the context there, and you can see that there was a lot that happened, right? There was a lot of back and forth, and I definitely failed many times. Oh yes, the content security policy. That is the thing that requires a lot of workarounds that I wasn't super familiar with, which led to the sort of architecture that exists today, which is, you know, most of what you saw. Where is it? It's in here, and I think it's in this content TSX file. A lot of the sort of front end of everything is defined in here, and there's a message passing system that basically works to, you know, fetch the data using this background service, and then enable me to use the sandbox to actually evaluate the queries and send them back to essentially content.tsx, which is the front end that we were looking at together. So, you know, we could modify this, rebuild the thing, and then, you know, change it if you want, or we can do something completely different.
Well, we've got a few ideas from the crowd. I had an idea. I don't know if this is possible at all. But all those JFK documents that were released yesterday, could we build something to do like information retrieval there, or be able to query them, or something like that?
Sure. Do you have a sense of where they are? Like I don't.
Yeah, I think I can. Give me 1 second.
I'll look up here.
Yeah.
Release. Where?
And they're in PDFs, my understanding is. So if you search PDF,
Gonna get like National Archives.
Yeah, I think those are. Let's open one and see what's up.
Okay. What would we want to do?
I mean, get a sense of what's happening in them.
Yeah. Okay.
Well, essentially, some sort of information. It may be tough to be able to do proper retrieval from this on the fly, but
yeah. Well, like let's just start with like a Next.js app, right? Like I think it's the easiest, and then I think to get a sense of what's in them, we'll probably have to maybe send them off to an LLM or something to have them like OCR'd, right?
Yeah, well, Mistral OCR is one of the best at the moment in my experience. But
okay,
and this may be trying to bite off more than we can chew though as well. I don't know. You seem like a pretty ambitious guy though, so.
Like if this is something we can attempt, let's attempt it. So JFK Explorer, we'll call it. All right, so we have a blank project folder here. And I guess maybe the first step is like, I'm just going to bootstrap an app, right? And I'll just use Next.js for that. Why not? npx, let's do shad sienna latest init. Got to install some stuff. Okay, sure. My app is fine. We're going to bootstrap this. Let me see if while that's happening, I can like understand a little bit more about this. So there's a lot of entries. Let's see how these things are paginated. So they're just paginated. Does this even like work? Oh, it does. There's just no change. There's just no the URL string. That's great. Cool. They've made this super accessible. I love it.
Classic, right?
Yeah. Let's see. We could probably read the DOM and like access them. So let's see if this started. Oh, it didn't. I didn't do all this. We'll use legacy pure dependence. Okay. So maybe let's this is the way I'd normally start is by sort of defining a plan, right? Like what are we actually trying to achieve? And so like let's do that together.
You are a product guy deep down, aren't you?
Oh, that's
no, I'm joking.
Actually what I am. That's actually what I am.
Yep. But this is it. This type of technology as well brings product and design closer to data, to systems, to software, and brings systems and software closer to decision making as well, which is super fucking cool, man.
Yeah. Okay. So, and sorry, it's hard to see like what you're saying, or right, because I'm trying to operate this computer here. So let's just get the app up and running first. But like I think maybe one of the things is like, look, can we actually retrieve these documents, understand like the structure of where they are? And then we can see if we can get them, and then if we can do something with them. Which again, I think we're gonna probably have to like OCR them. So I want to build an app that lets me explore the recent JFK document release. All of the documents are accessible from this. However, there aren't there isn't an easy way to page through them. However, what the app should initially do is, gosh, I don't even know. I guess like navigate the DOM, and we'll get some data about that just with DevTools. Extract the first, whatever this is, what, 10 URLs from the page, and I guess, how does this get sent? And then let's just get the URL strings. Extract it. Yeah, let's just do that. Let's start that, just so we can do something sort of incremental with them. And then we want to display the URLs on the page.tsx in this next JS app. And then we're probably going to need a reliable way of paging through and getting all of them, and maybe making a big list and then figuring out what we want to do from there.
Oh, and I just noticed, if you drop down, so if you go back to the website actually, if you, in the drop down, you can say how many entries you want to show, wackily enough.
Ooh. And that doesn't change anything.
No, it's insane.
Great.
This website was vibe code. That's the other thing, dude. Like, there's been vibe coding, pre-vibe coding, as if all the software out there, the people who wrote it, like the amount, like we've built things upon castles of sand, right? So
yeah. So it's in a table. That's nice. Okay, let's look at this. Web scraping can be challenging.
Well aware.
All right, well, let's take this approach instead of trying to figure out all. Oh, there we go. That's what I wanted. Where's that div? Okay, this is good. This is good.
Because we just want to extract the URLs for the files, right?
Yeah. Look for this div. Whoa. Okay. Why? This is gigantic. What happened?
And if you could just maximize slightly more, that'd be cool.
Is that better? This is like it.
Yeah, great. Yep.
This is humongous. Okay, let's just do it this way. Let's see how smart we can get the AI to be. We'll paste it in a picture here. Let's begin to simply implement this beginning plan. And then what do we want to do? I guess we can use thinking. I have Max available, but let's just use thinking and see.
Yeah, and just noting, for those who haven't seen, you're actually in agent mode now as well, which is a huge amount of fun. So it will decide to use tools and whatever else, and then are you in YOLO mode as well, or?
Yeah, I am.
Dude, you're a wild man.
Oh, it has to index my code base. Hopefully it did that. Okay, so it's planning its thinking here.
So it's thinking, trying to do something which indexes and
so normally it's smart. I'm in cursor settings here. Normally it's smart when you bootstrap a new code base to actually hit the sync button here, right?
Mm-hmm.
But I think it did. So we're going to see what happens. Scrape JFK data. It's making a library for that. Cool.
Awesome.
It's not especially fun to watch this all happen. I realize, so that's why.
Well, no, there's a certain zen to it though. Like when I say let's start the development server to see if our experiment implementation works. Like there is a certain zen to watching all of that roll on in, right?
Yeah. Well, in this case, we got agent mode to kick something off here. Oh, there we go. That was easy.
Awesome.
That was easier than expected. Let's see what happens if we. Okay, so that's not gonna. So that has. Interesting. Let's see the string over here. Okay, so since we're in localhost, okay. So that's everything up to files without, what was it? archive.gov. Okay. Okay, so now what I want to do is let's just quickly do the following, which is let's update our plan to document what we did. And I haven't even initialized a Git repo here yet. So, oh, I did. Okay, because ChadCN has, yeah, it comes with Git. Let's do this really quick. And normally we'd want to kind of build an incremental work plan. But I like to just kind of keep a record. Okay, so I'm just going to do a small change here. And, you know, we could just go into the app and probably make this modification ourselves. But this works great. However, when I click on the document link, I want it to actually take me to the correct site, which is prepended by this. And I'm going to unlink this instead of localhost. All right, so that should hopefully work. And I need to restart the dev server. So I'm going to start a new terminal here because it was.
And also feel free to use Super Whisper, which I know you have installed as well if you.
Yeah, I probably should. npm, looks like npm run dev this thing. So I have to be in my app probably. npm run dev, get this changed. Okay, see, like the base URL. I knew we could easily have done that ourselves, but
Sure.
Why not just ask the agent to do it? So we're gonna go back here, reload.
And just note, although we're vibe coding, like you just did a quick spot check on something as well, right? And we're talking about it. So
yeah, one of the things that I just normally do is I actually look at these. So in cursor lingo, these are called bubble IDs, and these relate to tool calls that happen behind the scenes. And this would be an edit file diff. And so I'm normally paying attention to what's going on in these. Now, this is a very simplistic app as it currently stands, right? But one of the things that you should always kind of look at is, you know, am I getting more sort of additions than subtractions? Depending on what you're attempting to do, right? Because sometimes, and at least historically, it was very probable or likely that you might get an inadvertent delete that just deleted a bunch of stuff. And if you're not paying attention, you could be in for a world of hurt. So let's look back here. Okay, so this works.
Dude, cool. Awesome.
Okay, so let's do something more complicated.
So we can get to the PDFs through the app we've built now.
Yes, well, this is the lamest app ever. We have to make it better. So let's define something here. All right. So next steps. Yeah, let's actually see if it can just do that. Okay.
Do what? Sorry?
So some of these potential next steps, which Claude so generously gave me whenever I asked it to update my plan, right? Like, let's do this.
Add pagination to view more than the first 10. Implement search and filtering capabilities. Improve the scraping patterns. Great.
Yeah.
Add metadata. Yep.
Let's use Super Whisper, actually, so I don't have to type. All right. This is a great first step. We've corrected the base URLs, and we actually want to enhance our scraping capability such that we can get more than the first 10 URLs. it actually happens to be on the site that we're scraping from. There is a ability to show more than 10 entries. How could we approach actually getting more than 10 entries when that site is first accessed? I just want to see what's going to happen.
Will it send you Selenium or something like that, do you think? What do you...
Well, yeah, I mean, we could take that sort of approach, but I want to see. I just want to see what Claude can come up with here.
Yeah, that was my question. I mean, you know it. Like, what do you think it could? Let's see. And I actually love watching these thought processes.
Yeah, expand it for people that are looking at this.
It does remind me, you know, like when we do deep learning or used to like actually train models, like watching the epochs roll on in, right? Watching your loss and accuracy, and you know, there is still pushing the boulder up the hill, but there's a vibe to it.
Yeah, this is just a hard site because there's no query parameters or anything that we're getting back, so it makes it a little bit more challenging. Let's see what happens. It looks like we're getting a few errors.
Is the final URL of the PDF encoded in the name when we do the dropdown? Because we could do a big screenshot of a lot of it.
Maybe
date as well.
This looks like a date. This is yesterday.
Yeah. So that's the date of release. Yeah.
There doesn't seem to be a reliable pattern to any of this, right? But maybe these are numbered sequentially, actually, right? Like the actual kind of, right? Like I'm just like the URL pattern is actually like, pretty straightforward, right? There's like I wonder. Let me make this smaller, and then we'll go to the end to just get a sense of like what the documents sort of end at, right? I don't. It's hard to. Yeah, there is a pattern. Let's see what happened here. Let's see what happened. Added length. I don't think that this is going to work. Whatever. Let's see. All right. Where's my app? Over here. Oh, well, there it did. It certainly did. It got all of them. How did it happen? I'm not actually sure. We can look at the code. All right.
We also just confirmed that it is the PDFs that.
All right. That looks like a different one. All right. Well, I'm sort of surprised. That's why sometimes it doesn't hurt to ask. Let's look to see kind of what it's doing. Why don't we do this? Why don't we ask it how it did it instead of us looking at all this code together, just because it's probably not as fun for like the audience. How did we actually achieve that result? It worked fairly well. Don't implement anything. Just explain the modifications to code that achieved this for us in the last set of edits. Okay. So this is nice, although this is like the usability. I guess the usability of this is almost better than
Yeah.
Now this document count seems low. Aren't there more than 2,000 documents? I don't actually know.
Yeah, there are like 30,000 or something, I think.
Yeah. But we have more to work with, so that's good. Okay, here.
Yeah.
Number allowing caller to specify entries to fetch.
I'm sorry, no, that's it. It is. Yeah, there are in two sets, one at 7 p.m., which was 1,123, and yeah, I was thinking the number of pages, but yeah.
Yeah, PDF stuff.
That's it, man.
We got them all. Okay, cool. All right. Sweet. Okay, so now what do we want to do? Does the audience have any ideas?
Well, yeah, maybe creating some sort of RAG system or information retrieval if we want to query it in some way.
Yeah, why don't we try to get some actual
get a sense of what's in there first.
Yeah, well, I mean, since they're all PDFs, it's like we need to kind of like OCR them, right? Like how would we build anything on top of this? Okay, let's do this. Okay. I want to be able to, and like we're getting some errors here, but like let's not focus on those. Let's use Super Whisper again. For a given set of files that I mark in the UI, I want to be able to send the contents of the PDF off to an LLM to OCR the results, and then give me the file name and the OCR content back in a new page. Let's use Claude to do this, just because I can get an API key super easily.
Tokens, yeah.
Yeah. Let's just give it that.
Sounds great.
Or maybe we can ask Claude what to do with a bunch of PDFs from JFK.
I wouldn't be surprised if Claude was cool on that.
I'm gonna do this because
do we want to incorporate this into the plan markdown as well?
Yeah, we can. Let's do that first. Let's update our plan with everything. I can't type. Everything we've just done. So that will run. Still no commits. Let's make a commit. Why not? Initial document retrieval of the JFK files with a basic UI.
Yeah, and this is something I haven't figured out. You'd be the person to ask about this. Is there a way to get like the chat in the commit and all the diffs that you're having in the chat with Claude or whatever in synced with Git?
Right here. We have it all right here from Spec Story, right?
So that's part of Spec Story. That's not.
Yeah.
Okay, great.
Yeah. Yep. It's part of Spec Story. So I mean, I guess for those that are interested, like there's a bunch of commands if you have this installed. But to install it, you can just go into the marketplace. You can go to our website. There's like a one-click install. You can look for it, and then one of the core pieces of functionality as you're working is it's auto-saving these composer logs directly to your project root in this history folder. So if I start a new composer session, it would start to save that markdown file. The other thing that we can do, and I'll show this just briefly right now, is I can share this to the web in sort of like a anonymous format, and it's going to push all that markdown here, and then you can see essentially what you saw just then, and I can add like arbitrary markdown blocks here and mark this up, and record a video, stick it in there, what have you. But let's go back to what we were doing. So we've documented that. I did save this. Let's use Claude 3.7 Sonnet to do this. So let's get something interesting out of this. To a document table, selection capabilities. Because what I have in my mind, just to make this more clear for those listening or watching, is that like we can just, well, it's probably in the, that was an inopportune time for that to happen. Like you could select a bunch of documents and then process them, right? Because we don't want to send all of these off to Claude at once. So let's let it cook here for a second. So it's made a new component, select documents. That's useful. So it's separating out some of the logic from the page, which is useful. And then it's probably going to need to create a, well, we'll see what happens here, where it puts it. We could ask it to refactor it into like a separate component. It's going to create a route, I guess, here. It's creating a route, and maybe a service to use Claude. Let me get a Claude API key for this purpose.
And while you're doing that, I'll just also flag, definitely beware everyone in vibe coding with API keys for services, because you can rack up some pretty serious fees pretty quickly.
Yeah. That's why I wanted to just do this very incrementally, right?
Yeah, of course.
So everyone saw my key. I'll burn it at the end. That's fine. All right, so we have an n.local, which is good, and we're going to paste that in there. Let's update the plan. Oh, it's sort of pulling from prior context that it should be updating my plan at the same time. All right, so let's see what it did. So we can select things. We have some integration here, server-side integration with this route. We have an issue here. I probably need to install that package. It did not do that for me. And then let's do that. So I'm just going to ask it. This looks like there's a bunch of problems, so we're going to have to solve for that. Let's get this key in here because I have it in my clipboard. Where is n.local? There it is. Paste it in here. Everyone sees this. Great. It's amazing. But they probably can't get it all. Save. Okay. Let's see what's going on right now with this, because I think it might be... Oh, it's not broken. That's good. It seemed like it was. There are all these issues. There's a bunch of issues.
Always.
Let's see what happens. Let's see actually what happens, because we didn't really define... Let's see, what is this page going to show us? I'm not actually sure. All right, let's just do... Let's look at one and get an understanding for what we'd expect. That looks like a really bad document to PDF.
Yeah.
to OCR.
Yeah.
Let's get a...
Yeah, and there are a lot of them like that, actually. So
yeah. This one seems somewhat readable. Let's try this one first.
Somewhat. Yeah.
What was that one? Now I forgot. Was it this right here? No, that was the wrong. This one? No. Oh my gosh. I can't remember what I just clicked on. This one? This one. Okay. It's 3, 2, 1. Okay. 3, 2, 1. Let's see what happens. Processing. Okay. Claude API error. Blah 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 blah. Can I not send this image off? Let's see if there's... Oh, let me actually check what model it's using, because that might actually be the problem. Claude. Where would that be? Is it in... Did they put it in... Okay, send... This might not be a correct model name. Let's look up...
That's an issue that happens a lot, right?
It does. Where it's funny because it's like literally Claude hallucinating
itself. Yeah.
Model name.
They should be grounded in their own documentation. All LLMs should be grounded in their own docs and other LLM docs, and aren't enough.
Yeah. Let's do... What? I didn't copy this right. Sonnet latest, whatever. I can just type it.
The other thing we haven't encountered yet is dead looping, which for those who don't know is horrifying. But it's where you get in a loop of errors essentially, and it will forget errors it's made before and rewrite code that it's done before.
Let's try this. Okay. Processing. Oh, can it not do the PDFs? Maybe we can convert it to an image first.
It looks like it wants a JPEG or a PNG or a GIF.
Let's try it like this. Let's just get some understanding of this. So I'm download this. I'll use Claude, just regular Claude. We might have to create an image first, which we should be able to do fairly easily. Is OCR this? Let's see. Okay, this seems like it actually is working. So, okay, let's try
man.
Okay. Does the API not support it? That might be a question. That might be a question to ask in Cursor. Let me go back to this. Sorry, I just want to get this error message.
No rush, man. This is the vibe we're surfing, dude.
So when we process a document using Claude 3.7 Sonnet in our app, we are getting the following error. Oh. I'm like clicking around like a maniac. But this is part of the vibe, right? Like just trying to solve some of these problems quickly. And I'm not familiar enough. See, this is a media type API. That's funny. Okay, well, it's doing what we just said. Is that actually true? I'm kind of surprised that the API doesn't accept PDFs, but the client does.
That would be that. Yeah, I should be surprised, but few things surprise me these days, to be honest.
No, it's like
After what we've seen the past several years, I mean,
API support PDFs. I guess I was on them all. Wait, it is available. That's confusing. It's confusing. Well, oh, maybe. Let's just see if this worked. That was like a simple enough change. Although this doesn't seem like it's actually gonna. Okay, you're just having to. It doesn't directly through the image field. Maybe we aren't specifying it correctly. Let's actually restore this.
You've got type image. That it may be. Yeah.
That's what I'm thinking, but I don't know what it should be. So is it just like type PDF? Like I don't actually know what the type field should be. That's the problem.
I wonder if Cursor could help with that.
Well, it already hallucinated the model name, so like that's a good question. Let's see if this works, which it probably won't, but we might be surprised again. That's not what I wanted to do. I wanted to click this. Okay. That's not a type. Document image. Oh, document. It's probably just doc. Okay.
Great.
That's what it is. So that error message was helpful. Okay.
Who would have thought?
I'm not sure about
Who do they think they are? Keras?
All right. Let's try one more time.
Famous last words. I love it when LLMs say to you, "This is the final correct version."
This is working. Actually, this is unless it's errors. This seems like it might work because it's processing for a while. Yep. Although, like, let's look at our logs. Oh, nope. Awaited. Okay. This is not working. All right. Let's do this here. Actually, let's clear this. I'm going to restart the server because there's like so many different error messages there. All right. Let's try it one more time to get like a sort of clean slate. All right. Here we go. All right. When we updated the document type to document and attempted to process a PDF, we're getting the following error from our server logs. Please help me address this. Oh, what?
Amazing.
I don't even know how that happened. Well, maybe, yeah, maybe there might be some synchronization.
Well, it sounds like you're really embracing the vibes and embracing exponentials, Greg, is what I'm saying. In
this case, but that was unclear. Okay, so it's now it is starting to not loop, but not this is the pure dead loop because we actually solved it. But I think this is the major issue. So we're going to probably reject at least part of that change. Look, it's only changed this one line. So document clearly works.
Yep.
And then hopefully it just resolves this issue. Now the real question is like, what happens when we try and process multiple at the same time? Because I actually don't know what the user interface is going to be, and so we probably want to then do something with that sort of text, so we can modify this page to allow us to do something.
Yeah, I think probably what we want to do is convert like for a certain number of PDFs, convert them into text files.
Okay, we can add some option there. So I've rejected that change because we know document works, and then. Okay, so it's rewritten a bunch of things.
Because in the end, I think one goal would be to like just get a sense of what's happening in these documents. Like we could even do some basic summarization of each document in a table or whatever, right?
Of course. Yeah. Let's just
and
see.
That's the joke, man. A lot of people like build RAG systems and then engineers rarely think of this. The first question people ask are, what is this corpus of documents about? Which RAG is horribly equipped to be able to deal with, right?
Indeed. We're still getting some of these await issues, but I think it is processing. We just probably need some better like user feedback here. Yeah. Because you saw how sort of slow this was actually to OCR. Totally. Yeah. Like we need a little bit of like better user feedback. That's why I was surprised when we like tabbed back to the app and we saw the thing actually done. Like it's just still chugging along. So we could add some logging to sort of show us incrementally, even in the terminal, like what's happening, right?
Let's do it.
Hopefully this actually does something. Let's see. I'm just patiently waiting here, but my patience is wearing. All right. This doesn't feel like it's doing what we expect. Oh, it did. So that took a while. Okay. I think it literally just takes a very long time for it to actually OCR these documents. Cool. All right. So it
take me a while to OCR them as well, to be honest.
To even read them. Yeah. Okay. So I'm going to stay on this page because we could probably just apply a hot update to this. So we have text here. Let's update the, although it's probably going to reload it because I'm not caching anything, right? Okay, let's update the page and OCR results to allow us to search, or I think we want sort of like document summaries, don't we? Maybe we should just update the OCR results to show the actual extracted text and like summarize some meaning from it. Okay, let's add a post-processing step such that, I'll do it like this, such that once we've successfully OCR'd the document, we can actually get a summary to explain what the document was about and have that be rendered above the OCR text on the OCR results page. Okay. Okay, that. And then let's also say, well, let's just do that. But I want to add a little bit more feedback.
Yeah, some logging would be helpful.
Know that it's not just hanging there. Yeah. And we'll do that right after we finish this.
Great.
All right. First, extending the Claude API to generate summaries. I hope it doesn't reload this page, but it will because it's like we have to actually process it. I was just going to add some basic search. This one is about Gestapo. Interesting. Oh my gosh. It did that again. It broke it. Okay. And then is there anything, I don't know if anyone's even still around in the chat, but is there any...
We've got 10 people. 10 people here.
Are there any ideas for what to actually do beyond document summarization?
Or if anyone has any ideas, I think maybe building a RAG system around it could be fun, but that may take a bit too long now.
Yeah, that's one of the challenges. Not going into this with like a great idea of what we wanted to do kind of makes it a little bit. Let's ask Claude while we're waiting for the other Claude to finish. So we've built a system that enables us to get every single document from the JFK file release, and we're OCRing them in our Next.js web app. Beyond summarizing the document contents, we have 2,000 documents. We're not going to process all of them, but what are some interesting things that you could help us think about that we could do with such a data set? All right, we're like clodding everywhere. Okay, two-phase Claude document processing. All right, that's useful. Added a second API call. That's fine. I don't think it, well, I don't know. It might be more than 15,000 characters. That's okay. Let's leave it for now. All right, here, we could topic, cluster them, timeline reconstruction. I think the problem is you'd probably want to OCR everything, which we're not going to do, right? Oh, compare documents, but it's like, what are we even comparing? We don't even know what's in it, you know? Document authenticity scoring. All right, let's go and test this. Oh, look at
Good.
that.
This is awesome. This
That was
document is a classified CIA message from September. It's our September moment again.
it,
But
it wasn't
September.
mine though. I was
Yeah.
born in '64. The message was sent to multiple CIS stations. Yeah.
The document reveals that this bloke had communist ties, having joined the German Communist Party, USSR. Fascinating.
Interesting. What does this one say? This document is a CIA name check. Who is this person? Let's see who this is. I have no idea.
Yeah.
Oh.
Wow. And look, they're not mentioned in many places. This is where they are.
Right.
This PDF is indexed. Yeah.
That's right. Okay.
Fascinating.
He's a Soviet citizen. Yeah, like there's no way you're gonna read this. Like there's just
No.
Yeah.
Not at all. But even we don't even need to take this much further. The fact that we've been able to vibe code a document summarizer with an a JavaScript app in the front end is super cool, man.
Yeah, it is. Maybe I'll stop sharing my screen so I can see you again.
Yeah, and you'll commit this, and can we share the repo with people?
Not only that, but I will share the spec story too. But yeah, let me look at gitignore, and I'll include the sort of context here.
Well, and we haven't necessarily described everything Spec Story does, so maybe it would be cool to wrap up by actually showing us the Spec Story and telling us a bit about what's up.
Yeah, I mean, one of the easiest ways is probably if we just like look at the docs, just so I have some visual aids, because it's an extension, so it's kind of hard to show off. I could show all the command palette things, but if you want a quick start, there's three primary sort of, I guess, pieces of value right now. One is, as you've already seen, when you just install it, it will start to read from the state DB that is in your cursor sort of user folder. And if you're on Mac, Windows, Linux, it's in different sort of places. And it will just start to extract your composer logs for you. None of that leaves your machine. It's all local, right? And you can do kind of what you want with it. One of the biggest use cases for these actually is if we were composing for a very long time and we accumulated a ton of context, right? If you need to start a new session, which we didn't do, and if we could, you can just @reference your old session to sort of bring the agent or LM, whatever you're using, up to speed, which can be very, very useful. Also, too, for people that use Cursor, Cursor is releasing a lot of improvements at a very rapid clip, and often, people's composer histories actually get lost and wiped. So you just have some assurance that if you ever want to get back to your prompts, you can, right? You can just select and save individual ones too, but like autosave kind of obviates some of that functionality. I showed that you can like actually share these things, which is one of the ways that I'll do this to put in your probably show notes, Hugo. And it'll be linked to the GitHub repo that has it in it if anyone wants it. And then the last bit is something that we just released, which I didn't have turned on, but I can turn on and kind of show this off a little bit because it does require sort of incremental generation for it to work. If I had it turned on, there's like a little Spec Story menu bar here. I have derived cursor rules off. But as we were prompting, what would be happening if I had this turned on was it would be sending these prompts in text to another LLM that would then be writing a cursor rules file for you automatically. That if you were doing something complicated and you really wanted to make sure the agent was always respecting your tech stack choices, or like the way that you wanted to name files or whatnot, you wouldn't have to write all those rules yourself. And so that one does, for those that are listening to this live or maybe later, it requires you to authenticate because we're actually making free LLM calls on your behalf. And do know that if you do use that, this prompt history would be sent to us, right? Because obviously we're processing it. But at the very base level, if you want to easily have your prompts and your history available to you, if you just used autosave, nothing sort of leaves the machine. The only thing that we collect are product analytics about, like, the fact that the extension gets activated and, like debugging information. And you can turn off that if you don't want it down here. So that's kind of it in a nutshell in terms of the main use cases. But what we found is that people really, really want their chat histories, right? And this is actually one of the first steps, as I was alluding to earlier in our conversation, about kind of linking your intent to code, which is kind of what we're working on next, which is also very, very fascinating, right? Because while there are these diffs in here, what you might really want to understand is what prompt actually led to what part of your code changing, right? You can think of it as like AI blame, right? If you're familiar with like Git blame.
Yep.
So yeah, that's the nuts and bolts of it today. Let me do this. Let's update our plan with a final entry and also write a commit to memorialize what we've created. And I probably should change my git ignore, which might be, it's because I know what's happening. Git was actually initialized in my app folder and not in the root. That's why these aren't getting committed. But I'll fix that after this.
Great. Cool, Greg. So it's going to be time to wrap up in a minute, but I'd just love to know, for people who are getting like started with AI-assisted programming and coding and software composition and composing, a lot of the conversation, as we've discussed, has been like, you've got people building apps on Twitter on one side being like, I've got the next SaaS, whatever. You've got people on the other side saying, this is totally useless and a horrible use of time and stop talking about it. What advice do you give to people who want to like sit in the middle of the space and explore what's up?
Yeah, I mean, I don't think that there is any substitute for getting your hands dirty, right? And so it's like, don't trust everything you read on the internet. It's like, just pick a path, pick something that you're interested and passionate about, choose one of those tools or products that's sort of closest to where you are technically, and start exploring. Like, I mean, if anyone's familiar with a gentleman named Ethan Mullick, he wrote that book Co-Intelligence, right? He also posts a lot about LLMs all the time. One of the pieces of research that he's been associated with is I think it was like a Harvard study. It could have been Wharton. I'm not exactly sure.
He's at Wharton, I know that.
He calls it like the jagged frontier, right? Mm-hmm. He talked a little bit about it in Co-Intelligence, but it is actually an HBS sort of paper. Even though he is associated with Wharton. But there's this fantastic sort of blog post that he wrote on his One Useful Thing Substack. And really the gist of it is, there's no instruction manuals for these LLMs, right? And when they're in a coding context, it's kind of clearer what you can or can't do. But even when we were just doing what we were doing, I was surprised by the way that that code was generated to be able to allow us to get the entirety of all of those URL strings, right? And sometimes you just kind of have to have the, I guess, courage to push the boundaries a little bit about, like, even if in the past you thought like, hey, I really need to research this and figure it out, you can just ask things and be surprised when you get answers. And of course, it's always like trust but verify, but you really need to try and figure out how to push the boundaries of what these products can do. And I think there's no better way to do that than playing with them. So, as a final piece of advice, it would be immerse yourself in, the various LLMs that you can access, pay for subscriptions for. And for this particular use case around building with AI, treat some of this like, with a beginner's mindset, right? Like, you might have an identity that is, hey, professionally developing software is something that is really important to me. But until you can explore this jagged frontier and kind of let go of that a little bit, you're not going to know what the boundaries are, right? And so that's where maybe I'd leave it is, be curious and keep prompting.
Love it. And I just want to thank you for your wisdom, your time, for coming and sharing it with us. And thanks everyone who's here still for sticking around. This has been 2 hours, Greg, and it's flown by. So I'm excited for the next time we get to have a chat as well.
Yeah, me too.
So thanks once again, my friend.
Yeah, thanks for having me on. I appreciate it.
And see you all soon. And seen. Dude, that was awesome.
Cool.
Did you have fun?
Yeah, I hope people want to listen to that for like 2 hours.
Oh, dude. Yeah. So on the actual podcast, I might cut out the demo, but then create a YouTube video of it because
no one wants to listen to that, probably, but maybe.
Well, you never know, man. People are mental, dude.
How many people do you normally get like watching the live stream?
Anywhere between like 30 and 2,000, depending on like
how many were watching our live stream?
So we've had over 50. We've had 53.
Okay.
And which is good, man. Like I usually get more when it's like several guests and one of them's Jeremy Howard, to be honest, right?
Names, obviously, right? Like
yeah. So I just want to share.